2020 had it all: social unrest, political drama, and a global epidemic. And it all came together to spin up financial headwinds that affected all of us in very personal ways. A series of lockdowns, quarantines, and social distancing led to record unemployment. That led to small business loans, federal stimulus payments, and eviction protections. Personal finance is where all of these issues intersect, and our bank account is where the rubber hits the road. This year at CES, CNET is taking a look at some of the ways in which personal technology will help us navigate our finances in 2021. Welcome to our panelists. We have Varun Krishna, Senior Vice President and Head of Consumer Finance at Intuit in San Diego. We have Josh Woodward, the Director for Product for Google Pay in the US, who's joining us from Oklahoma City. And we have Dan Egan, Vice President of Behavioral Finance for Betterment in New York City. Thanks for joining me today. So let's dive straight in here. 2020 was turbulent, okay? What are some of the things that you all saw people struggling with from a financial perspective in 2020 that was different from previous years? Varun, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would say a couple things. One, people mainly struggled with the loss of income. And as a result, it kind of creates a domino effect, dipping into your savings to cover shortage gaps, taking on a new job, reducing expenses as much as possible, or even potentially leveraging your debt to get by. And so I think this just really reinforced the importance of budgeting regularly, having a cash cushion for times like these, and having good credit just to cover some of your living expenses. I think the other thing is just people also just struggled with uncertainty. Uncertainty with the economy, the stock market, and just what that could mean to their long-term plans or goals as well. And I think all of this just created just a high degree of financial stress and worry that just made the need for being on top of your finances a lot more top of mind.
We all throughout last year saw a lot of financial uncertainty. And it expressed itself in different ways. We saw a lot of different customers trying to find offers when they were shopping. That was a huge behavior we saw shift. We saw a lot of online shopping obviously happen, but we also saw things where customers were watching every dollar spent much more carefully. So we saw a big uptake in how people would watch fees or dispute fees. So really the big theme was every dollar mattered. And people we saw were looking for apps and also services that were in their corner, had their back.
Obviously, the first one is the loss of income for a lot of people. Amongst our client base, we saw a large number of people who actually already had emergency funds. So they were drawing down on assets that were meant to hold them out through 3 to 6 months, is generally what we recommend. And we're now looking at 9 months a year of dipping into those things. So things like the CARES Act that allowed you to dip into your retirement accounts helped quite a bit to help get people over that sort of minimal line of sustenance. The other side of things was very strange. For people who didn't lose their jobs, who were maybe in a white-collar job where they could work remotely, it was very different. You sort of see a lot of higher savings amongst those people, and also more spending and using their money in ways to entertain themselves. So online shopping went up, investing in your home went up significantly. There was a lot more online purchasing of things, obviously, and that's easier when you're on an app. So there's a lot more, a friend of mine puts it as a lot more people were trying to have a material solution to what was fundamentally an emotional problem about how long is this going to go on for? Am I at risk of losing my job, et cetera? And a lot more of what I call entertainment investing. So getting involved in the stock market as if it was your local sports team because you wanted something to keep you entertained through the course of the day.
So obviously the big story 2020 was COVID-19. Did you see things that were specific to sort of COVID that impacted people's approach to managing their finances?
Yeah, it was interesting for us. What we've seen, not only in the US, but globally, is that a lot of what we expected to happen at Google regarding digital payments was accelerated drastically. And it happened with consumers, it happened with merchants, and it also happened with banks. And so for consumers, one thing we saw was a huge shift to contactless payment. I think with merchants, what we saw is that merchants were trying to find creative ways to really reward their most loyal customers, but also still try to attract new customers because they were struggling too. And we saw a shift towards a lot of digital coupons and other creative ways for redeeming offers that way.
The biggest change we noticed was that people started taking the idea of having an emergency fund more seriously, both in terms of funding it. We actually saw a large number of deposits of the original stimulus going directly into safety net or emergency funds. And people who already had them but continued to be employed actually grew at larger, just in case. So we saw a lot more sort of preventative or savings behavior to deal with these kind of downsides that you have with the modern economy.
Yeah, when COVID hit and the economy was forced into lockdown, when we looked at our Mint user base, we saw an immediate drop in spending, just both frequency of spending as well as the absolute dollars that were spent. Now, I would say in aggregate, a lot of that initial shock has normalized. But as we dug deeper into the data, there are definitely some positive and negative impacts that are lingering. But a lot of it is really dependent on the industry. Like, for example, grocery and home improvement industries have been really thriving as people are leveraging this opportunity to work on their homes. At the same time, we've seen, probably not a surprise, a huge drop in air travel. It's been pretty diverse depending on the customer base that we have, as well as the specific industries themselves.
Yeah, and you mentioned airline travel. I have to believe that that's going to come back, assuming that the vaccination rollout eventually happens and we're able to clear the hurdle of COVID. I'm wondering what else from 2020 kind of brought to light some of the significant trends in personal finance that you think are going to stick around?
One of the biggest is the remote work situation, or the ability to work from anywhere. This is more personal finance on the earnings side. But the conversations that are being had about how much should you get paid if you do the same job in San Francisco versus Oklahoma City, the cost of living there, but also how that plays into people's priorities. Do they value space or being near family? I think that's accelerated a trend that would have been slow and gradual into a tsunami of people moving away from cities or their home offices and being able to work remotely. Over the next 2 or 3 years, especially as the ability to go back into the office comes back, I think we're going to see this sort of ossification of where it matters and where it doesn't. And that allows people to have a very different financial life. It might mean for some people they can have a larger house somewhere else, but they also might invest more in having a home office and not going into a physical office. So the work side of things, I think, actually has been disrupted as much, if not more, than the consumption side.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. I would just add that I think a lot of the lingering effect of this dynamic that we've seen this past year is really just awareness of what matters. It's forced people to kind of reconcile needs versus wants. It's forced them to reconcile the importance of where they live versus where they work, the importance of family, how they spend their time. And I think that many of those are probably positive because it's kind of forced us to all realize what matters most. And so I hope to see some of those trends continue to linger in terms of how people value the time and priorities that they have in their lives.
Yeah, I think for us, we're really excited about, I think, how people have adopted a lot of these personal finance technologies and apps. And of course, some of it's Google, some of it's others. And I think what's happened is people, now that they've realized that, you can have your bank on your phone, you don't have to kind of dig through a purse or a wallet to check out. You can buy stuff very easily online, and increasingly more and more, making that simple and secure. I think these are behaviors that are going to stick for a long time. I think one other area that we're really watching closely is also just how businesses are reacting to this. There's consumer trends that are definitely changing, but obviously businesses, whether it's a SMB or a very large kind of multinational, the pace of innovation, the change is happening in ways that these are investments that are going to play out over many, many years. So I think we're seeing it on both sides and kind of trying to study on that, where the real innovation and insights are happening.
It's a great point. And you bring up sort of the convenience of apps, right? And apps are where a lot of our personal financial decisions are being made right now. And convenience is a big part of that. But I've been thinking that, convenience can also be an impediment in some personal finance scenarios. It's easy to make an impulse buy online. It's so easy to move money between accounts. How should we be thinking about the trade-offs between convenience and caution?
I think it's a great point, and one that I often touch on is, I think we're somewhat aware that sort of social media apps, Facebook, Twitter, etc., we are not the actual customer. We're the user, and we're there to basically provide eyeballs for ad revenue. I think it's interesting to think about how that operates in the financial world. So we know that certain brokers have gotten fined because they sell their clients' order flow on to high frequency traders, and that there is that same element of sort of like you as the user are actually getting sold to somebody else in that fashion. So one thing that I'd like to see and understand is the degree to which we view through our financial data and our actions should be benefiting from that directly. I understand how that might work with sort of targeted ads, so I get products and services that are relevant to me, but I haven't seen it quite as much yet for financial data. Another element of it that I think is tricky, and it's a very powerful trend, it can be good and it can be bad, is the creation of sort of self-selected but fractured communities. So if you're interested in day trading, there are multiple forums you can go onto where you'll hear about how much money people made day trading. People often post about their successes, but not their failures. And so there's a sort of level of the ability to choose which communities you're part of and hear stories from that community. This can be good. It can be like learning how to woodwork. And it can also be bad in that you only hear perspectives that you already know you want to hear. So I think that sort of social spaces that are widespread, they're not private, they're not you and close friends, they're sometimes strangers, but they allow you to share things on a specific focus, be it the FIRE movement or day trading, is a really powerful trend that comes through apps and the internet.
What we've learned is that when it comes to personal finance, one of the things that's really tricky is that people inherently have cognitive biases. They suffer from things like loss aversion, norms, a bias toward the present. And I think technology can really be a key to actually adapt to and correct for some of these cognitive biases, specifically leveraging capabilities like behavioral science or artificial intelligence. One of the areas that we're investing pretty deeply in is around just automation and AI to actually help people protect from themselves. We use that to basically deliver products that can help people make more money with less work. And so I think it's about the intersection of not convenience for convenience sake, but it's convenience to deliver a tangible benefit to the customer that goes beyond just the speed at which you can execute something. I also think that this isn't just about technology. I think one of the biggest problems that customers face is confidence when it comes to making the right decision. Even with all the advances in behavioral science, artificial intelligence, many people at the end of the day just want to be able to connect with a real person to give them the confidence that they're making the right decision. And so I see a world where the combination of technology, real people, expertise can actually be combined to deliver customers not just speed, but also confidence that they're making the right decision and a decision that will give them benefits in the long term.
I think that point about confidence is a huge one. And it's what we've seen in our customer research as well. Often when we talk to people, they want to make the right decision, the smart decision, but sometimes they just don't know where to start. Finances, money, it's really complicated and messy. And so one of the things we've been trying to do with Google Pay is think about how can we deliver insights about your spending, organize all that financial information for you so you can be informed, you can make those decisions. And I think that's really one of the ways we think about our app and also about where people are right now, is they want to be empowered to have that information so they can decide.
That's interesting. And I think that there's probably a difference between people's comfort level and what they're willing to do in an app that might be generational. So what are we learning from the way that millennials, right, that sort of next generation to kickstart their own sort of personal financial life, what are we learning about the way that they approach those types of questions?
So a couple of things here. I think one is the general idea that tech as a tool can be very useful. The common one I hear about is the use of password managers to have secure access to all of your websites, not worry about getting hacked as much. The number of times I've heard of people my age teaching their parents how to use them so that they don't repeat the same password over and over again is pretty huge. So one is that general, just like using tools. There are tools out there that you can use to improve your empowerment. Another one is this element of being open and sharing. So I think that older generations tended to have a very non-sharing, non-transparent approach to money and personal values, aside from like, how do you earn more money? With things like the financial independence, retire early movement, how people are spending their money, choosing to have jobs that make them happier rather than get the highest paycheck. That openness amongst younger generations, I think, is good not only for them, but also leaks upward into older generations. And I think the platforms that are out there that allow people to learn technical subjects, share this information, learn from each other, that's something that all generations are benefiting from right now.
One of the big behaviors we're seeing among this segment is how do they get insights about their spending? And I touched on this earlier about being able to kind of make smart decisions based on that information. It's not enough just to see a list of all your transactions. People want to know, how much did I spend last weekend? Am I tracking, according to my savings goals? Am I able to spend on this thing at this time, or should I wait till later? These are the types of questions that I think are really hard to answer, but are actually the most valuable, and where people are really asking us to think about. And you see it across the country, across different backgrounds, all in this age segment of how can my phone give me these insights so I can spend and save in a much smarter way.
I mean, millennials have become a major topic of conversation in the personal finance world. And I think one of the reasons for this is just in large part because they've been dealt a pretty tough hand. On average, they're making less money than their parents were at their age. They have to deal with incredible debts like student loans. And on top of that, they're facing, a recession pretty early in their careers. When you add to that the COVID epidemic, it's kind of further derailed their financial independence, right? And it's cemented their expectation of that financial uncertainty. Now, I think the good thing is, despite all these challenges, what we've seen is that millennials are actually more pragmatic and self-aware when it comes to their finances. They're aware about the need to pay down their debt. They're aware of things like the FIRE movement. They care about things like saving for retirement. And they work hard to stick to a budget. And what motivates us to create products like Mint, TurboTax, Credit Karma on the Intuit side is that we believe they can be empowering, they can be rewarding for people. We can help them establish and stick to those good habits and give them a sense of progress that instills confidence. The idea of creating products that can allow you to demonstrate progress in small steps is one of the things that we fundamentally believe in can really enable millennials to kind of endure and persevere through the times that we're facing now.
So we'll tread carefully here, but I do think it's worth bringing up because there's a lot happening that politically that has ramifications for people's financial lives. So what are some of the political issues that you're going to be looking at as we make the transition into 2021?
I think for us, one of the things we're really interested in, and where we're working closely with regulators too, is how does banking evolve and adapt in this environment? I think some of the things you're seeing from the Fed pushing forward with real-time rails and other ways to make settlement much faster in the US, these are incredibly exciting projects and really can change how the financial ecosystem works, I think, in the US. And so we're interested in trying to understand where that's headed. And of course, some of the projects we're working on with Google with the different banks, from very large banks like Citibank down to sort of regional banks and community banks and credit unions. These are sort of ways we're trying to get involved in this. But I'd be really interested to hear how the other panelists are seeing it too. Those are some of the things we're seeing from our seat.
I won't go deep into the political or regulatory issues, but as a company, what we focus on is nonpartisan tools. I will say that as far as the financial industry is concerned, there's never been a higher currency on things like privacy, data stewardship, and just a more empowered and aware consumer. And I think these will be the hallmarks of financial products moving forward. Now, our goal is to increase access for all to financial tools and advice that have historically been reserved for potentially higher net worth individuals. As a company, we believe in financial empowerment for the masses. And we also believe that the financial system itself doesn't need to be predatory in order to build products that are successful. So if we're doing our job well, managing your finances should just simply become easier, more accessible, and more rewarding.
One of the big ones, I think this is a little bit more personal for each of us, is being wary of allowing our own personal politics to cloud our judgment about things that might not be directly political. So one of the pieces of research that we've done in the past has looked at how people reacted to elections, and that if you tend to come from a county that mostly went for the winner of an election, you have this belief that the economy is going to do great, that the stock market's going to do great moving forward. And of course, that's not strictly true. It's mostly independent of which political party happens to have won the most recent election. So the first one is to be a little bit wary of how your own biases can leak into your financial decisions in ways that aren't going to really help you in the long run. From a sort of legislative point of view, there's obviously the fact that the CARES Act was implemented, which allowed people to take money out of their retirement accounts more. It's interesting to see how and when that might get undone, or is it something that will persist and people are going to start using their retirement accounts as emergency funds in the case of a break the glass in case of emergency. I think there's also some interesting work to be done on the fiduciary rule, both for registered investment advisors as well as potentially for brokers. That was an issue that took a back burner over the current administration, but it might be the new administration wants to revisit that and see about strengthening the regulatory oversight for consumers in those specific areas.
So moving from the political to the personal and the more practical, let's talk about apps and technologies and some of the platforms that are sort of emerging. Where are the most interesting intersections between personal technology and personal finance right now?
We're moving into a world, I think, where a lot of these apps are tools that can work for you. Of course, at Google, we think a lot about how can people search for this information and think about it. And I think one of the features that I'm really excited about that we launched last year in our new Google Pay app is the ability to search across your transactions in a way that you can deeply understand your spending habits and your spending behaviors. That gives people real power, real information about their spending in a way they've never had access before.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're at a cusp of a really interesting inflection point in the next generation of personal finance products. And I personally believe that that generation of product is going to be fueled by the intersection of artificial intelligence, collaboration, and data. What I envision is a world where more and more of personal finance becomes implicit versus explicit. Understanding a user's behavior and actually making decisions on their behalf for their betterment. Understanding, for example, that you're going to overdraft your particular bank account and getting a notification in advance of that so that it doesn't happen.
There are two interesting aspects to it. I might take it a little bit off piste here. One is finding newer or different or better income sources for someone. So it might be that you've been in your job for years and you are now really qualified to do consulting or some kind of side gig where you're helping other people. It might be mentoring. And the platforms that exist now allow you to find and match with each other much more easily. So I think that more people could have a more diverse set of income streams. Another one that's kind of related is a book I read recently. It's called, I believe, 30 Lessons for Living. And the big thing there is like you're learning from people who are older than you about what they did right and wrong in their life and incorporate that into a financial plan and saying like, hey, congratulations, you're 27, you just got married. You are at risk for kids, which means you are at risk for daycare costs. The ability to see around those corners using each other's data and to give sort of a personalized look ahead to somebody, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think it speaks to the fact that there are these like blind spots that a lot of us don't see and don't know that we should be thinking about. What are some of those types of things that you're all seeing from your customers or clients? What are sort of the big blind spots that most of us aren't thinking about that we should be?
I've already used up my my power move of not saving it up for daycare, for kids' daycare. Another one that I actually think is pretty important and that people lose is taxes, and specifically tax planning throughout the course of the year. Taxes are not something you should think about once per year. I know nobody likes it, but doing incremental tax planning through the course of the year allows you to make a little bit more money for yourself, to know what's coming ahead. Another one that's been alluded to is these blind spots that come up with recurring payments, subscription plans, especially sort of annual ones. Being able to make sure that you don't end up spending money that you're not benefiting from simply because you forgot about something. That's sort of monitoring, an ability to see, oh, I need to cancel that subscription before it goes ahead again. I think that's a blind spot that I definitely have. And I really appreciate it when personal finance apps warn me about it ahead of time. I think there's too much reactivity to previous spending and not enough kind of, hey, in 2 weeks, this is going to happen. Are you sure you want it to go down the way that it's scheduled to go down?
Yeah, I think there are two big blind spots that I would call out. I think the first one has to do with long-term consequences of short-term actions. A lot of people don't realize that, when I take that auto loan and I take a hit to my credit score, that has a compounding effect that matters years from now. If you have a reduced income or a higher debt level, let's say you had a drastic cut in income for a year or two, You depleted your cash. Maybe you took on a little bit of consumer debt to cover your living expenses. As a result, you're not able to get to your financial goals, but maybe that makes you take a payday loan or get a cash advance. And a lot of consumers don't realize that these short-term decisions have a massively compounding effect that can trap them for years. And the ultimate impact of that is just their financial goals in the long run get delayed. So I think it's important that everybody sort of reviews their entire financial situation and tries to think ahead. And personal finance apps like Mint and others can definitely help with that. Another big blind spot that I think is more macro is just that we haven't yet seen the total effect of the economic state in the stock or the real estate market. With all the stimulus money and programs, there's a chance that could impact inflation and cause the purchasing power of the dollar to be affected. We haven't seen how the real estate market's going to be affected long term. You have many people today that are protected by things like renters eviction protection or mortgage forbearance relief programs. So you could see more and more people not being able to afford where they live. You could see more foreclosures. We have changes to the way commercial real estate have been operating. I think Dan talked about this earlier, but as more companies and workforces continue to work remotely from home, with many people deciding to stay at home, these are potential blind spots that are going to change the economic structures of how we operate today.
I'm interested in what your top sort of financial tip would be for people who are struggling to navigate this space.
One that I've already alluded to that I think is really powerful is not trying to have to come up with it yourself. You're not the first person to find yourself in this position. The next one is to try to make sure that it's fun and interesting. So, like set a time when you're going to do it. Make sure that you have, chocolate or a drink to sit down to do it with, and do it in chunks. So say like my only job to think about this today is to think about, okay, what kind of insurance do I need? I'm not going to buy it. I just want to figure out what kind of insurance I need, and that's my only task. So do it in little slices that feel manageable and make sure that there's some fun, some positive aspect to getting that done at that point in time.
Yeah, I had a similar instinct. I think this is, for a lot of people, a really, really hard time. And there's a lot of fear and uncertainty. And I think finding people that you can kind of go through this with together. You can do online. You can find people that have been in a similar situation. And I think that's probably the number one thing I'd pass along is don't do it alone. Have a community you can find it and connect with.
Looking forward, maybe beyond 2021, even 2022, and sort of into the future here, is there one app or technology for the personal finance space for that people could use or take advantage of that you really want to see invented or perfected?
Finances are personal, right? It's an incredibly emotional area for people. And I think products that understand the user but are also empathetic are going to be key. So I imagine a world where a product can not just understand where I'm at or what I need to do, but how I feel and what it takes to actually motivate me. So I would love to see a new breed of apps that are not just focused on efficiency or outcomes, but also on some of the more intangible things like psychological safety and emotional awareness.
Wouldn't it be great if there was an app that was your financial coach that you could turn to in any moment and ask a question and be able to understand, here are your options and here are the trade-offs. And I think being able to automate that and scale that in a way that was simple, that was safe, that was helpful, to me, that would be a game changer.
One that I'd like to see, and this actually touches on a point that Josh made, is sort of inverting the relationship between client data and who uses and stores it and has access to it. So I think it's a little bit of an infrastructure play to say, if there were standardized formats for all financial transactions and data, and where I, the end user, had access to, like my, like my previous years and current year's tax forms and all this information that goes into good financial advice and planning. And I could selectively allow other apps access to it to give me advice or let me know about recommendations they might have, but that I'm in control of it. And ideally, I'm the one who gets to decide who has what information. That sort of change in the power structure of the data could unlock a lot of opportunities for people to come up with apps that are built on top of that.
This was a super fun conversation. This is a very important topic. You've given us a lot to think about. I want to thank you, all of our panelists, for a really lively and engaging conversation.